I'm based in Copenhagen.
Okay, great.
So I don't know who's hosting the Zoom call, but it says that I need permission from the host to share the screen.
I'm not, I guess. I'm not. I think it's on. Is it you, Rida, or is it someone else?
No, I think the team will give you the permission.
So, do we have who is welcoming the participants? Are they online already, or you're not managing this? Who is the managing team in? I don't see any participant yet. Oh yes, it's there. Sorry, 26. Fine. Okay. Oops.
Okay. Thank you.
Merci.
I don't know if you want to start showing an agenda for the day or for this session, or.
I mean, no, I think we're waiting for the introduction by
Okay.
Jérôme first. Should be coming. Did you find a way to share with stream?
Yes, it works now.
Okay, great.
And where are you based?
I'm based in Paris.
Paris. Okay.
Ah. Dr. Jérôme.
Oh, hello everybody.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Morning.
Ça va?
On est là.
Parfait. Il faut que je trouve de l'électricité par contre parce que j'ai l'ordinateur qui va to be out of battery in a few minutes. So
C'est bon, Jérôme, tu es prêt?
Oui,
Je pense qu'on peut démarrer, hein. Je ne sais pas qui donne le top départ, mais je pense que c'est bon. Tout le monde est connecté. On attend
OK.
le feu vert de... Non, je crois que c'est bon, hein.
OK. So, okay, I will start. I would like to thank.
D'accord, je vais commencer. Je voudrais
Ah, OK.
remercier,
Who
je
is,
voudrais remercier
who is speaking?
l'interpréteur.
Okay. So, oh, nice. Incredible. So I can. So, do you prefer I speak in English or I speak in French?
Either.
OK. Bon, on part en français, comme ça, c'est plus facile pour moi aussi. Donc, vous traduisez simultanément.
Oui.
OK, allez-y. Alors, bonjour à toutes et tous.
Good morning, everyone.
Je suis très heureux d'être ici
Very happy to be here
comme directeur
As
de
a-
l'African Cities Lab.
director of African City Lab.
Nous testons pour la première fois la traduction
We
simultanée.
tested the first time the simultaneous translation.
Donc, vous serez
So,
indulgent avec nous sur
You will
la
be
question technique.
patient on the technical aspect, and
Mais on essaie puisque nous sommes dans un
try
contexte
as we are in a
bilingue
bilingual
avec
context.
une grande partie de l'Afrique en français et une
A
grande
big part of
partie de l'Afrique en
Africa
anglais.
in French and the other parts in English.
Donc, ce matin, sentez-vous complètement libre
So,
de parler
this
in English or in
morning,
French.
feel
It's up to you.
to speak either French or English.
So the translation will change. If you change the language, the translation will change from English to French or French to English. It's complicated because he has to follow. So we lost the translation when I speak in English. So, but it's okay. I will switch in French again. Juste quelques mots pour remercier les intervenants et pour remercier aussi les participants. Vous êtes relativement nombreux pour cette heure de la matinée. Translation.
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. I told you that we will have some.
They were setting a
some
technical
issues.
issue so that
Okay.
You will not be hearing me. Only participant can hear me.
Okay, perfect. So, je continue donc. Un grand merci à nos panélistes de ce matin et de cet après-midi. Et l'intérêt pour nous, c'était de développer en 4 sessions de webinaire une compréhension des mécanismes de développement des villes africaines. Nous avons commencé par la ville digitale, qui l'est de fait, puisque on a des taux de pénétration de la téléphonie mobile qui sont au-delà de 100% dans certains pays africains, avec une répartition continentale qui est quand même relativement différente en fonction des pays. Nous avons ensuite, donc c'est une ville de fait digitale, qu'on le veuille ou non. C'était le premier webinaire. Le deuxième webinaire était sur la jeunesse. On a dans certains pays plus de 50% de la population qui a moins de 20 ou 25 ans. Donc, à un moment donné, on devra, en tant que penseur spécialiste de l'urbain, savoir ce qu'on va faire avec ces populations qui sont à la fois jeunes et qui représentent une opportunité incroyable pour le développement des villes et aussi, dans un même temps, une menace incroyable pour la stabilité des structures telles qu'on les connaît. Donc, en fonction d'où on va se trouver dans la balance, c'est une opportunité ou une menace. Dans tous les cas, on a, de mon point de vue, une vraie opportunité de construire avec la jeunesse. Faut-il encore savoir quelles sont les aspirations de ces jeunes aujourd'hui qui sont pour la plupart de plus en plus nés avec le digital. Troisième, et c'est aujourd'hui, nous avons la question de la résilience et comment cette résilience pourrait être une réponse au changement climatique. Donc, je ne vais pas développer maintenant ceci, je vais juste laisser ensuite la parole aux intervenants, mais pour vous dire que cette série comme ça de propositions, cette série de webinaires s'inscrit dans une continuité qui trouvera son point d'orgue à Cotonou au début, au premier semestre 2023, avec une conférence en présentiel, comme dans le temps, mais aussi en ligne, rassurez-vous, pour ceux qui ne peuvent pas être là. Donc, on aura une grande conférence à Cotonou. Donc, cette série de webinaires sont l'opportunité pour nous d'introduire les grandes thématiques que nous utiliserons, que nous développerons à Cotonou, à la fois en présentiel et à la fois en ligne. Voilà pour la gestion finalement et pour l'objectif plutôt de ces webinaires. On est au troisième, on aura un quatrième avant la conférence. Je ne dévoile pas encore le sujet. N'hésitez pas à nous suivre sur les réseaux, c'est important pour nous. On est en train de créer cet African Cities Lab qui, pour ceux qui ne le savent pas, est une émanation de 6 universités africaines avec aussi le support de l'EPFL en Suisse et du secrétariat à l'économie suisse, qui est le bailleur de fonds de cette belle idée. Le but de cet African Cities Lab, c'est de développer des cours en français, en anglais et du matériau pédagogique que nous mettrons sur une plateforme. Voilà, en gros, ce que j'avais à vous dire ce matin. Je vous remercie pour votre participation et je vais donner la parole à Ludovic Jonard, qui va être le modérateur de cette matinée. So I just stop here. I thank you everybody for your participation, and I would like to thank Chiara and all the team in Benin for the organization, and all the team in Morocco, in the Center of Urban Systems, and Rida, Stefan, El Bashir, and in Benin, Axel, and all the team. Sorry for, I will forget a few names, sorry for that, but I really would like to thank you, everybody, for the hard work they did, and I'm very happy to start this webinar. And Ludovic, I give you the floor, so I just stop right now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Jérôme. I will follow in English. I'm happy to moderate this session of this first webinar. Just to introduce myself very quickly, I'm an architect planner involved in developing countries for more than 30 years, and I'm also involved in resilient and sustainable urban planning mostly in Western Africa. Just to get quickly started, yes, we can start right now. I'm going to introduce you John Mottelson. He's an architect planner. And his presentation will deal with cities for forest, the relation between cities and forest. John. Okay, John, the floor is yours. You will have something like 20 minutes for your presentation, and we'll have a session of question and answers later on.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I'm an assistant professor at the Royal Danish Academy in Copenhagen, but most of my work in academia and also in architecture and planning deals with informal urban development in Eastern Africa. And this is a drone photo that I took a few years ago in the periphery of Maputo, Mozambique, showing the unplanned, unregulated urban development in the city. And as you can see, the trees play a crucial role in the urban space. So I was asked to talk about the green space or trees, urban forests in relation to urbanization in Africa. This is not a particular focus in my research, but some of my research deals with this issue. So I will present 2 papers today that focuses on urban development trends in Maputo, and I'll try to highlight issues related to the topic of trees and urban forests. So just some overall definitions to begin with. The UN defines slums as housing characterized by the following characteristics. Oh, Jeremy, can I ask you to mute your microphone? Yeah, so slums are defined by insecure tenure, overcrowding, substandard housing, and inadequate access to water and sanitation. However, in the academic literature, the use of the term is contested as it's seen as legitimizing evictions of settlements. Can I ask the administrator of the session to mute Jerome's microphone, because it's a little bit disturbing?
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, so slums are generally not used in the academic literature because it's seen as legitimizing evictions of residents of these neighborhoods. Instead, the term informal and informal settlements are used, and this refers to lack of state control of the urban development. So these are urban areas that are not regulated by the state. So people construct without formal construction permits, and they lack formal ownership of the land they occupy. So it's extra-legal urban areas that operate without state control. And this leads to insecure tenure in many instances. So the residents risk evictions because the buildings are not constructed according to regulation, and the residents lack formal documentation of the ownership of the land. In sub-Saharan Africa, more than 60% of the urban population resides in informal settlements. So this is not like a marginal phenomena. It's the dominating trend in urban development that urban areas develop without enforcement of regulation and control of the urban development. And this is in part induced by unrealistic requirements in the regulation, but also due to widespread poverty in urban centers. So people lack the resources to comply with urban regulation. The state sectors lack the resources to enforce and plan and administer the widespread urban development. And this is linked to the overall demographic trends. So Eastern Africa is one of the least urbanized parts of the world, but the region is urbanizing rapidly. I think between 30 and 40% of the population in Eastern Africa resides in cities at the moment, but the cities are growing rapidly due to migration from rural areas to urban areas, and also high fertility rates. So the total population of Africa will quadruple over the next 100 years. And if you look at the long-term perspective, it's really the part of the world that will grow most substantially in the long term. And due to the lack of resources in the public sectors, urban poverty, and this widespread urban growth, it's likely that the growth of informal settlements will continue in the coming decades. So research on informal settlements is really important in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, and it's closely linked to the wider challenges facing our global societies, such as climate change, migration, and inequality. So in preparation of this presentation, I thought a bit about the conditions in Morocco, since the host of the session is based there. So I visited Morocco a few years ago, and I spent some time in Casablanca, among other places, and I thought it was interesting to see that there is informal urban development taking place in Morocco, but it takes place in these small enclaves mostly. So you have like formal parts of the cities and these small pockets of unregulated urban development where the low-income segments of society placed, and that's quite different in Maputo and Mozambique, where most of my work is situated, where you have a formal urban city center, and then you have widespread informal urban development surrounding the city center, where more than half of the population resides. So I'm quite interested in the relationship between urban density and other aspects of human life. So, for example, how urban density is linked to carbon emissions. If you have a very low density city, people are more likely to drive around in cars, thereby emit more carbon. There are also important links between urban density and access to job markets and so forth. So a lot of my research includes variables such as floor area ratio, population density, but since we're looking at trees in this presentation, also urban tree canopy cover, which is a very, very important indicator of the density of trees. Urban density is really important in the context of sub-Saharan Africa because of the lack of resources for investments. So peripheral low density developments leads to amplified problems with mobility. So when you lack investments in infrastructure such as highways and streets, and you have a lot of low density peripheral development, it'll lead to decreased mobility, longer transportation time to access education and job markets and so forth. Whereas high dense central urban development is associated with compromised public hygiene due to lack of stormwater management systems and sewage and so forth. So density is linked to some of the most important aspects of issues linked to urbanization in Africa. So compromised public hygiene and compromised mobility. And I did one study that examined urban density dynamics in informal settlements in Maputo. It was published in the form of a paper for the ISEF conference in 2020, and as a book chapter with Professor Paul Jenkins in a book titled Densifying the City, Global Cases and Johannesburg. And the studies essentially examined 3 case study areas in Maputo, and it examined development of public space, development of built space, and development of tree canopy coverage. And in addition, the study also examined population density dynamics based on census data over the same 10-year period, namely from 2007 to 2017. And the study essentially found that the trees were diminishing from all 3 case study areas. So so people basically densified the neighborhoods through construction of new houses. In 2 of the cases, they also encroached on the street space, so you had smaller street space after 10 years. And in the third most peripheral case, the street space was actually expanded because this, in this case, the area was transformed from a very rural setting to a kind of a suburban setting over the 10-year period. So new streets were implemented in this case, but in all three cases, the trees were the urban tree canopy coverage was decreased over the 10-year period. So essentially, it shows that the volume of biomass in trees is decreasing in informal settlements in the city. And one interesting component was that actually the number of trees had increased in the peripheral case. So when transforming like this kind of peripheral area into a more like suburban kind of situation, people cut down the existing trees, but they also plant new smaller trees, as exemplified by this case. When looking at the population density dynamics, the city itself, like within the municipal boundaries, had almost no growth, only 1% increase. Whereas when you look at the greater Maputo metropolitan area, the city grew with around 60% over this 10-year period. So you have like very widespread urban growth, but it doesn't occur in the city centers. Actually, the three most centrally located administrative districts had decreasing population densities due to smaller family sizes. And this is occurring in parallel with the increasing population density, built-up densities, as demonstrated in the development of the built fabric. And two of the case study areas were located in these central districts characterized by decreasing population densities, but also increasing built densities. So you have built densification occurring alongside decreasing population densities, which is kind of interesting that people occupy more space, but yeah, a fewer people occupying the same space. So it might be an outcome of decreasing family sizes and also improved economic conditions for the population residing in more central urban areas. So most of the urban growth in the city is accommodated through this widespread urban expansion with informal urban development. And this is occurring alongside the decreasing bio volume in the green component of the city. Then I did another study that compared planned urban areas with unplanned urban areas. So both the planned and urban areas examined are informal settlements because they are typified by lack of enforcement of urban regulation. So you have like areas that were planned back in the late 70s and 80s that subsequently developed without any enforcement of regulation or with very little enforcement of regulation. And then you have neighboring unplanned settlements that also developed without enforcement of regulation. And you can see examples of the two areas here. And I basically compared the urban form of these two types of areas with case study areas being adjacent with each other. And I examined these three case study areas located in centrally located informal settlements with adjacent planned and unplanned informal settlements. And then I compared the build-up space, the public space, and the green space in the city. And the study essentially found that the planned areas are characterized by higher level of built density, a higher proportion of public space, and lower proportion of green space. And this is kind of interesting because urban planning is usually seen as a prerequisite for developing sustainable urban form in the region to improve the conditions for investments in infrastructure, improve conditions for improving the mobility. But it also leads to decreased urban tree canopy coverage. So essentially decreased volume of green space in the city or biomass in the city. And this is, of course, important because trees are important in the city in the sense that they provide shade in this context and thereby improve the microclimate to become more comfortable for the human body. It's also linked to infiltration of rainwater in the ground, so it's important for rainwater management. And lastly, trees are an important component in the biodiversity in the organic material in the city for other plants and animals. So planning basically leads to lower tree canopy coverage, and that's an important issue to think about when planning in cities in this context. The key findings are that the green space is diminishing in informal settlements in Maputo, and that trees are actually less widespread in planned informal settlements. So this leads us to that it's important to raise discussions on strategies on how to improve or increase the volume of trees in informal settlements, and this could be improved by planting trees alongside new infrastructure investments, for example, implementation of new streets. I think I'm running over time, so I'll end my presentation here. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're absolutely not over time. Thank you very much for keeping the time. We may have some questions about the participants, but I'm not able to connect. Please, if any participant have a question, you may write on the screen so that I can push forward the questions, because up now I have no access to the questions. Maybe I will start with one question for you. In the meantime, I was wondering, what can regulation or urban plan or development plan or local plans can do about implementing the agenda of putting more trees or growing, even of domestic place or even on the open space? Is there an option that you can see to improve that progress?
I think it's difficult because the resources are limited, and we're talking about urban areas where regulation is not enforced to a very high degree. But I think when you look at cities in Eastern Africa, there are widespread, large-scale infrastructure projects being implemented, usually in part funded by international donors. And I think if a green component played a larger role in these projects, it could potentially become an important strategy to improve or increase the volume of trees in cities in the region.
Okay, I think I'm going to check if there is any question. I'm going to read one. Are trees safe in slum in Maputo since the exposure to cyclone is so important? Isn't it dangerous to plant trees? Should we consider other greening solutions, urban agriculture, or, for example?
That's a good question. I think actually trees are important in decreasing the risk of cyclones and storm issues in general. So I don't really see the conflict there. In my opinion, urban agriculture can play a minor role in as a strategy, but considering how to use space more efficiently, I think it is a more effective strategy to have a sharper segregation between agriculture and urban development, or like dense urban conditions, to have agriculture outside of the city limits and concentrate the population in more dense urban conditions to improve mobility and other positive aspects of compact city development. To me, urban agriculture is not a viable strategy to address issues with employment or economic development.
Okay, thank you. Another question, more technical. Did you negotiate with local communities or authorities to fly a drone to get your pictures? And
I got permission from the local authorities to fly the drone.
And another second question is, what is the impact of basic planning on housing price? I'm not sure about whether it's. Did you get?
I don't think there's any data on this, but I have an hypothesis I would like to explore in another study.
Okay.
Namely, that planning leads to increasing housing prices because the middle class, in my hypothesis, would probably prefer residing in planned urban areas, as these have access for cars, and I think this constitutes an important amenity for the middle class. And I think because of this, the competition for plots in planned urban areas, or the price of plots in planned urban areas might be higher, and thereby there would be a socioeconomic dimension in the planned, unplanned differences.
Another rather technical question as well. Is there any what kind of digital solutions can support urban tree cover? To ensure the green cover of informal urban settlements. What kind of digital solution you have in mind?
I'm not sure that I have a digital solution in mind, but it can certainly be used to track the development and follow if potential implemented strategies are working or not.
Okay, I think there are more questions coming on. I'm not sure to cover all of them. I'm going to pick one. One is the situation in Egypt, where they say there's a competition between the state interest to expand roads and to build more against the agricultural land and green public spaces. So is in absence of civic engagement by the population, what can we do about this kind of competition between forest and the cities?
I think Egypt is a quite unique case because you have very productive agricultural area in a very confined space along the Nile. I'm not an expert on the development in Cairo or other areas of Egypt, so I don't know if I can provide useful answers in that context.
Okay, maybe another question which is kind of related about the existence of strategic or vision documents for greening policies in East African regions. Do you have come through this kind of instruments that can better plan or better impose this kind of green approach?
My feeling is that it's not something that has a very high priority among local stakeholders. So I haven't really seen it emphasized anywhere. That's my feeling. But I would be interested as well in studying this in more depth. So if anyone has appropriate resources, please share. Thank you.
Okay. Another question about policies. I think it's kind of related to what you said earlier, but question is quite interesting. Can we still call a city without any green space?
Well, I think the definition of cities has more to do with density of population and built space. So human settlements are defined as populated areas. A city without any trees, if it's still a city, I think it is by definition, but the question remains if it's a nice city or not. And I think trees play an important role in improving the qualities of the urban space. So I think it's more related to the quality of the space than if it's a city or not.
Okay, so let's put another case study. I mean, we have a question from Cotonou in Benin, and it says that, of course, the city has been overcrowded with buildings, and there's no more any more open or green space except some flooded areas. So, what kind of solution would you recommend to kind of fight against this situation? How to remodel the city with a green heart or green belt.
I'm not an expert on that city as well, so I think I would be cautious in providing any bold recommendations. But I think in line with my previous arguments, I think that in relation to larger scale infrastructure projects, the green component should play a larger role. So if you plant highways, or if you expand roads, or if you plant public squares, then I think a tree planting strategy should be crucially central in these efforts.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to have a last question because we are running out of time. But as a conclusion, maybe there are many questions, and I thank the participants for their questions. I will take one to kind of summarize. You mentioned that there is not much of interest in greening the cities, but did you find, we know that there is a big policy debate and debate on policies about greening and climate change effects. Do you think that there's enough money? I mean, there's money available into funding agencies to go for this reforestation or re-greening projects in 4 cities? Is there money available somewhere that you can have some views on?
Well, we know there are funds available, but in the end, it's a matter of priorities. And considering the vast scope of the urban development in sub-Saharan Africa, there are a lot of areas that require attention. I think, to me, the insecure tenure and lack of formal land rights for the majority of the population in the city remains perhaps the most important question, because without formal land titles, you can't have formal urban regulation or urban development, because construction permits relies on formal ownership of the land. You can't build a house without owning the land, and if you can't build the house legally, then you will build the house extra legally, and then you have unregulated urban development, which in many instances produce compromised livelihood conditions for the residents. So I think perhaps, there are a lot of other important issues to tackle, but certainly thought should be put into like how to address the issue with decreasing green space in the cities, certainly.
Okay, thank you very much. I apologize for not having shared all the questions. There were so many. I think many questions related to some case studies mentioning Ethiopia or in pilot project that can be seen as good examples, best practices. Thank you so much for your presentation, and I think it was a great of interest for us. I will now have to shift with our next presentation, who deals with walkable and bikeable cities in Africa. Do we have Mrs. Penihan Vega available?
Sorry, Ludovic.
Yes.
I think Mrs. Penia, she could not join us until now.
Okay.
I think while waiting for her return, we will go directly to your presentation.
Okay, so shall we go through, or shall we go through for the next presentation, shall I do my presentation right now?
Yes.
Vida? Okay.
Yes.
So thank you for for this. I will now do a double role as I'm moderating, but I'm also involved in making a presentation. I'm going to shift to something else. I'm going to share my screen up. Sorry, just 1 minute. Okay, you see my screen? It's okay? It's okay, Rida? Can you see my screen?
Non, pas encore.
Oh, okay. Tac. Tac. Is it okay now?
Okay, now it's
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk very quickly about a project. Je vais parler en français, pardon. Excusez-moi, pas pour le traducteur. Je vais parler en français pour être un peu plus précis. Est-ce que c'est bon pour la traduction? J'espère. Il s'agit d'un projet, d'un cas d'étude réalisé au Sénégal qui pardon, je vais démarrer la vidéo. Voilà. Bonjour à tous. Excusez-moi, j'ai mis la vidéo. Il s'agit d'un cas d'étude au Sénégal qui concerne justement la question de la ville durable et la ville résiliente dans le cadre d'un projet de la Banque mondiale et d'un projet financé par le Fonds de l'environnement mondial. Donc, il s'agit d'une ville côtière. Comme vous le savez, Saint-Louis au Sénégal est une ville au bord du fleuve Sénégal et qui, en fait, a fait l'objet d'un projet de planification urbaine qui intègre justement les enjeux de résilience et de développement durable. Toc. Voilà, je ne sais pas comment on fait. Le projet consiste à travailler sur les questions de la planification urbaine. Donc, on travaille bien au niveau de la réglementation et des documents d'urbanisme pour traduire dans la régulation les mesures de résilience face au changement climatique. Donc, l'enjeu de ce projet était de comprendre concrètement comment la planification urbaine peut intégrer cette question du développement durable et de la question du changement climatique. Par rapport à des enjeux sur une vingtaine ou une trentaine d'années. Donc, le projet consiste à traiter un territoire avec une ville importante, qui est la deuxième ou troisième ville du Sénégal, et qui subit des pressions climatiques très importantes puisqu'elle subit l'érosion côtière, elle subit la submersion marine, elle subit de graves inondations qui perturbent le fonctionnement de la ville et de son territoire. Donc, l'idée d'un plan d'urbanisme, c'est une méthode de travail qui qui innove dans la planification parce que dans sa méthodologie, elle insiste sur le diagnostic territorial, elle insiste sur la création d'une vision d'un territoire et d'un cadre stratégique qui permet de répondre à des enjeux qui ont été identifiés et donc de développer des stratégies de développement dans un plan d'action, dans une feuille de route et avec aussi des solutions. Donc, avant de demander au bureau d'études de faire les plans d'urbanisme, puisque dans ce cadre-là, moi, je ne travaillais pas en tant que urbaniste exécutant, mais aussi pour le compte du gouvernement sénégalais, on demande au bureau d'études qui produit les plans d'urbanisme de faire ce travail méthodologique et de planification stratégique avant même de produire le plan directeur d'urbanisme conforme au code de l'urbanisme. Tout ça dans la perspective d'essayer d'innover dans les prescriptions et les enjeux et les instruments de planification, que ce soit dans les aspects réglementaires directement ou dans les aspects graphiques, spatiaux. Le projet, bien sûr, est inscrit dans un objectif bien plus large qui correspond aux objectifs du développement durable, donc pas seulement l'objectif 11 qui concerne les villes, mais aussi des objectifs transversaux qui parle des questions de villes résilientes, des villes inclusives, des villes durables, des villes vertes. Et donc, c'est tout l'enjeu, hein, évidemment très ambitieux, de rentrer dans les grands accords internationaux, la nouvelle agenda urbain en Afrique, les plans locaux, enfin nationaux, qui consistent à rendre la programmation du Sénégal comme un pays émergent, donc des aspects économiques et de développement social. Et donc, ce projet pilote de planification urbaine est un peu un exercice de rentrer dans ces cadres internationaux et nationaux et de le traduire au niveau territorial. On parle bien de la territorialisation des objectifs du développement durable. Tout cela est fait dans le cadre d'une stratégie nationale de planification qui a été conçue aussi au préalable dans le même cadre de ce grand projet de la Banque mondiale sur ces questions de villes secondaires et qui permet justement de rendre cohérent et harmonieux le plan d'urbanisme dans sa conformité réglementaire, mais aussi dans sa perspective de duplication, puisqu'il s'agit après de faire d'autres plans d'urbanisme à l'échelle territoriale. Dans ce cadre-là, le diagnostic est extrêmement important. Il s'agit de couvrir l'ensemble des thématiques du développement pour pouvoir s'assurer des priorités et de pouvoir donner un peu des orientations qui permettront d'assurer un développement maîtrisé à moyen, court et long terme. Donc, on balaye l'ensemble des enjeux sur les aspects de développement pur spatial urbain, sur les aspects économiques, sur le transport, la mobilité, sur les infrastructures, sur l'environnement et les risques climatiques, et sur le cadre institutionnel et normatif, puisque, comme ça a été d'ailleurs rappelé un peu dans la présentation précédente, la question de la réalité des plans, hein. Les plans sont nécessaires, mais ne sont pas suffisants, puisqu'en fait, on parle beaucoup de villes informelles et de règles qui ne sont pas suivies par les acteurs ou même parfois par les acteurs institutionnels eux-mêmes, hein. Les mairies, les collectivités locales ne sont pas forcément les premières à faire respecter les règlements, et donc ça, c'est un vrai problème. Donc, comment inclure ça aussi dans un plan d'urbanisme, le fait que le plan d'urbanisme n'est pas suivi lui-même? Ce qui est important de retenir dans ces innovations sur la prise en compte des enjeux climatiques et environnementaux, c'est justement de faire des études pour produire de la connaissance. Un des enjeux, c'est vraiment de comprendre quels sont, à des échelles territoriales, les phénomènes climatiques, de voir quel est l'impact sur un territoire précis et donc au préalable disposer d'informations extrêmement précises par la modélisation, par la cartographie satellitaire ou d'autres techniques qui permettent justement de documenter de manière scientifique les phénomènes pour pouvoir y répondre de manière précise en termes d'urbanisme. Donc, d'autres outils sont possibles. Donc, on simule des scénarios climatiques, les inondations prévisibles. On peut ainsi caractériser les niveaux d'exposition et la vulnérabilité. Et aussi, on peut commencer à faire des plans d'aménagement au niveau du drainage des eaux pluviales, au niveau du drainage des villes ou de l'assainissement pour pouvoir justement assurer un meilleur service ou améliorer en tout cas les services urbains de la ville. Donc, les contraintes sont assez grandes, hein. En général, on est toujours dans des zones qui sont particulièrement affectées parce que zones côtières, parce qu'il y a une méconnaissance des vrais risques, parce que le foncier, les territoires n'est pas utilisé correctement et crée de nouvelles perturbations. Donc, si on continue de construire dans les zones à risque, il y aura encore plus de risques. Et parce que les enjeux de démographie, de croissance démographique dans les villes sont vraiment à prendre en compte pour pouvoir créer de nouveaux modèles d'urbanisation et que parfois les zones inondables, les villes inondables côtières sont pas suffisamment ont une topographie très contraignante pour pouvoir installer des réseaux par exemple et sortir les eaux si on parle d'inondation. Donc, j'ai parlé du cadre réglementaire qui est toujours très mal suivi, mal appliqué, et puis un manque de ressources, évidemment, des institutions, des agences. Je vais passer assez vite, mais en fait, l'idée, c'est que dans ces plans, on essaye d'avoir une approche un peu systématique de l'ensemble de la ville. Et comme on ne peut pas tout faire, on essaye d'intégrer des enjeux prioritaires pour notamment les populations les plus vulnérables, ce qui suppose qu'on doit connaître où sont les vulnérabilités et où sont les populations vulnérables à traiter. Et ensuite, seulement, le plan permet de faire des propositions concrètes. Donc, il agit à plusieurs échelles, à court terme, à moyen terme, à long terme, avec essentiellement un arbitrage sur qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire dans l'existant, quelle est la ville, qu'est-ce qu'on peut reprendre, réhabiliter dans la ville existante et qu'est-ce qu'on doit pouvoir préparer comme territoire pour l'extension urbaine sans que ça soit de l'étalement urbain qui est contradictoire avec la ville durable puisque quand les densités d'habitation ou de cadres bâtis ne sont pas suffisantes, eh bien, la ville n'arrive pas à fournir les services urbains de base comme l'assainissement ou le transport. Donc, la vision d'un territoire est essentielle. Il s'agit de remettre des stratégies importantes, consensuelles, participatives, pour pouvoir prendre en compte de manière officielle la question, par exemple, du défi climatique, la question de la salubrité de la santé publique, et puis d'assurer quand même un agenda du développement pour une population qui doit avoir du travail et avoir une vie économique. Donc, je vais assez vite. L'idée importante qu'il faut retenir dans cette processus de planification, c'est qu'avant même de faire des plans de zoning ou des plans classiques d'utilisation des sols, il faut se pencher sur les questions de stratégie sur des enjeux plus larges que les petits quartiers, mais qui donnent une ossature, une structuration, une ligne de conduite pour la ville, pour pouvoir décliner ensuite des prescriptions à l'échelle locale ou à l'échelle des quartiers. Donc, des postures très importantes sur l'équilibre des territoires, les zones urbaines, les zones rurales, la question de planifier avec la nature et non pas contre la nature. Donc, on vient de parler des questions de forêt et de verre, de couvert végétal par rapport à la zone urbaine. Donc, comment rentrer dans ces questionnements et puis avoir des enjeux d'économie, de planification et de gouvernance. Je vais aller assez vite pour dire que les thématiques d'intervention concrète, de prescription dans les plans, vont à la fois sur l'habitat, sur l'environnement, sur l'idée d'avoir des nouveaux modèles urbains, de nouvelles trames vertes et bleues qui participent de la structuration de la nouvelle ville plus résiliente et résistante aux impacts climatiques, et de travailler sur des enjeux de développement urbain, de développement humain et de développement économique. Voilà, la question des plans d'urbanisme est une question aussi de gouvernance et de capacité des autorités à les mettre en œuvre et à les faire respecter, ainsi que la possibilité de faire venir de grands projets structurants par des grands équipements qui vont permettre de connecter les territoires entre eux et de faciliter un développement, même sans les plans, qui permettent de faire avancer l'inclusivité et l'équilibre pour toutes les populations. Voilà, je vais m'arrêter là. Je pourrais partager plus longtemps, mais je pense qu'il faut que je laisse la parole aux questions. Juste une dernière carte sur la question de la vulnérabilité, qui est une carte importante qui permet justement de bien cerner les enjeux et les priorités en termes de développement urbain. Voilà, je vais m'arrêter là. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Merci Ludovic.
Je vais prendre les questions. Qu'est-ce que je fais? Je repars sur les questions. Hop, je vais essayer de reprendre les questions. Alors, je ne vois pas de questions. Alors, si je vois une question qui est sur les moyens de diffusion des connaissances qui sont produites sur le projet. Je pense que alors c'est une question très importante parce que j'ai parlé j'ai parlé de production de connaissances. Il est très important que les plateformes de connaissances, notamment des systèmes d'information géographique, soient non seulement utilisées, mais partageables et accessibles pour le public. Donc, c'est un grand enjeu qui est très difficile à gérer, mais qui, en fait, commence à prendre forme, puisqu'en fait, des institutions, des agences au niveau des ministères ou que ce soit de l'urbanisme ou de l'aménagement du territoire, disposent de plateformes en ligne où les plans sont sont rendus disponibles au public, et surtout par rapport à d'autres acteurs du développement que sont les bureaux d'études ou les professionnels, on peut accéder aux bases de données qui ont permis de faire des cartographies, notamment des zones à risque, ou alors du niveau des tendances des dynamiques urbaines, ou la cartographie des circuits de mobilité ou de niveau d'équipement des populations. Donc effectivement, aujourd'hui, il est très important, et les bailleurs de fonds, les agences de financement insistent sur l'aspect de la diffusion de l'information et aussi de création de supports particuliers qui sont destinés à former ou à sensibiliser les populations. Donc, par exemple, dans ce projet, il est demandé au bureau d'études qui fait le plan d'urbanisme de produire des documents et d'animer des ateliers de restitution du plan pour le diffuser, le communiquer auprès des mairies concernées, mais aussi des populations ou des communautés ou des associations qui sont impliquées. La question est un changement l'enjeu de tout ça est un changement de culture sur la logique de l'espace et de son organisation. Et ça, évidemment, c'est un projet un peu long et un peu laborieux. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Je n'en vois pas. Rida, est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions?
Non, je pense que c'est bon. Juste, Ludovic, une dernière question.
Oui.
Donc, c'est une question qui a un rapport direct avec l'abondance des données. Maintenant, je pense que, point de vue gestion, les décideurs, donc, ils sont conscients de l'importance d'avoir cette architecture, cette structure. Donc, mais le problème, surtout dans le contexte africain, c'est la disponibilité des données. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour rendre ce hub des données disponible pour faire des interventions rapides, directes, en cas de catastrophe, par exemple?
Ça, c'est vraiment une très bonne question. Je pense que tout le monde est à peu près d'accord pour dire que sans données précises, on ne peut pas faire grand-chose. Il y a aussi un autre problème que je peux rajouter dans la question, c'est on a demandé par exemple aux bureaux d'études qui sont des agences d'urbanisme internationales qui travaillent avec d'autres experts locaux de travailler avec l'université. Pourquoi? Parce qu'en fait, dans les universités, il y a beaucoup de travail et de recherche, développement sur ces questions, justement, à la fois de connaissance de la ville et du fait urbain et surtout des villes en développement informel, puisqu'en fait, c'est des sujets qui sont quand même souvent peu étudiés, malheureusement. Et en fait, les universités produisent aussi des données, mais elles ne sont pas mises à disposition parce qu'elles ne sont pas considérées comme opérationnelles ou officielles, et elles restent des données académiques. Et donc ça, c'est un vrai souci, mais ce qui se passe aujourd'hui, c'est que on arrive, grâce à dans les termes de référence des études qui sont soumises à appel d'offres, à demander aux bureaux d'études, aux agences qui répondent, de s'associer avec des universités ou des départements de recherche pour qu'ils puissent justement travailler à la fois avec des données un peu à pointu et avancé sur savoir comment traiter ces données, parce qu'il ne s'agit pas d'avoir les données, il s'agit aussi de les exploiter correctement. Et d'une certaine manière, ça permet aussi de pérenniser les données, notamment la gestion et la mise à jour des systèmes d'information géographique, parce qu'on s'aperçoit que malheureusement, les mairies ou les collectivités territoriales qui sont censées garder la connaissance cartographique et les données qui vont avec à leur niveau local ne le font pas parce qu'elles ne sont pas formées pour, ou parce qu'elles sont pas compétentes, ou elles n'ont pas les moyens, ou alors encore une autre option, c'est qu'elles ne comprennent pas trop l'intérêt. Et c'est vrai qu'il y a aussi un décalage entre l'usage de la carte de la planification par rapport à des professionnels, par rapport à des usagers ou des agents économiques ou des promoteurs locaux immobiliers ou des particuliers qui vont qui veulent construire et qui détournent en fait la question réglementaire et qui construisent et sans règle. Donc la question de la donnée, elle est à la fois liée sur sa gestion et sa mise à jour, mais aussi sa disponibilité et sa compréhension. Donc il faut qu'il y ait une base de données accessible et normalement c'est du domaine public. Hein. Alors même si parfois au sein d'un ministère il est compliqué d'avoir la donnée parce c'est une ressource et c'est même une ressource, je dirais, qui peut se vendre. Et donc je dirais que une piste, c'est vraiment de travailler avec les universités qui sont quand même beaucoup plus ouvertes et plus neutres dans ces enjeux-là et qui permettent justement de garder une bonne capacité à la fois de maintenance de la donnée et de son exploitation pour mieux la redistribuer puisque c'est censé être une donnée ouverte. Alors voilà, c'est une piste de travail. Hein. Je dis pas que ça se passe comme ça malheureusement à chaque fois. Et c'est vrai que malheureusement on s'aperçoit que dans plusieurs projets on recommence à chaque fois à faire des données à chaque fois qu'on fait un plan d'urbanisme parce que justement la donnée d'avant on peut pas la trouver, elle n'est pas centralisée. Même si aujourd'hui de grandes agences arrivent à financer des agences de cartographie par exemple centralisées qui permettent justement d'avoir un point, un guichet possible pour les données. Je sais pas, je pense que j'ai vu d'autres questions qui arrivent. On va en prendre une ou deux encore et puis on va passer. On a un peu de temps, ceci dit. On pourra peut-être avoir d'autres questions à débattre avec les autres personnes. Je regarde.
Il y a une question concernant les articles scientifiques. Est-ce que vous avez envisagé donc d'avoir des articles scientifiques dans ce projet, peut-être?
Alors malheureusement non, mais si quelqu'un s'intéresse, à ce sujet, je pense qu'on sera tout à fait. Enfin, moi je ne suis pas le directeur du projet, hein, mais je pense que ça intéresserait tout à fait. C'est notamment la Banque mondiale hein, qui finance ces projets. On continue d'ailleurs avec Là, je vous ai parlé d'un plan directeur d'urbanisme, hein, donc c'est un plan c'est un peu l'équivalent d'un schéma directeur hein, qui traite plutôt d'un territoire. Et là, on est en train de lancer toujours sur la même ville, des plans de détail hein, qui vont rentrer dans les quartiers à des niveaux, à des échelles beaucoup plus fines, pour permettre justement d'avoir des prescriptions et des projets beaucoup plus dessinés. Mais peut-être que ça vaudrait la peine. Alors, c'est pas prévu pour l'instant, mais ça pourrait être tout à fait un territoire de capitalisation auquel on pourrait associer, bien entendu, une recherche universitaire. Mais pour l'instant, c'est pas prévu. Donc, s'il y a des gens qui s'intéressent, en tout cas, je pense que vous pouvez même trouver en ligne hein, déjà ce projet. Hein, c'est un projet qui est connu au Sénégal, qui est un peu pilote. Il y en a 2 ou 3 seulement, malheureusement, au Sénégal. Mais c'est vrai que c'est une bonne question. Donc, c'est ouvert et s'il y a des gens qui s'intéressent, je pourrais tout à fait, avec plaisir, vous relayer votre demande et voir comment on pourrait en faire un terrain d'étude en tout cas. Mais en tout cas, nous, on ne va pas produire malheureusement d'articles scientifiques. Je crois qu'il y a une autre question. Quand ça sonne, c'est qu'il y a une autre question, je crois. Je crois que j'ai l'impression qu'il y a un problème de traduction ou est-ce que je me trompe? On peut peut-être, je vais enlever mon écran, on peut peut-être passer à la présentation suivante. Rida, c'est bon?
Oui, c'est Francine Strauss, elle est avec nous.
Okay. Okay, I'll switch to English then. The next, thank you for the questions. The next presentation is given by Francina Strauss. She's involved for many years in the United Nations sector and NGOs, and she's also involved in climate change. So the presentation will deal with the SDGs, number 11, and resilient cities, climate challenge in Africa, with a focus on innovative and smart solutions. Are you there, Frusina? The floor is yours.
She was there. I think
She
she
was
has
there.
a problem of connection.
Hello everyone. This is Selene, Frugina's colleague. I'm texting with her. She's connected, but she's not able to hear anything from the floor. So just please a couple of minutes until she figures it out.
No problem.
Sorry for that.
Je suggère que, comme on a une présentation en moins, peut-être qu'on aura l'occasion d'avoir des questions et des réponses plus larges avec les panélistes. Si vous avez d'autres questions, je les regarderai et puis on pourra reprendre le débat après cette dernière présentation. Alors, je regarde s'il y a d'autres questions. Je vois qu'il y en a d'autres. Je vais continuer à prendre des questions en attendant que Frusina nous rejoigne. Je vois qu'il y a une question sur l'introduction de l'intelligence artificielle dans ce projet. Alors, pas du tout pour l'instant parce que c'était pas dans les termes de référence de l'étude. Je rappelle que c'est pas une recherche, hein, c'est une étude de cas sur un projet qui est réalisé, qui consistait à produire un plan d'urbanisme. Et malheureusement, il n'y a pas on est déjà dans l'innovation par rapport à intégrer dans le plan d'urbanisme la notion de risque climatique au niveau réglementaire et que dans la méthodologie déjà de demander une stratégie de ville durable, c'était déjà une grande innovation, mais peut-être qu'effectivement dans les projets futurs, il faudrait arriver à introduire cette question d'intelligence artificielle. La question, c'est plutôt, à mon avis, pourquoi faire et pour qui, parce que il faut pas oublier que quand même ces villes ne sont pas forcément très en capacité de pouvoir gérer ce niveau technologique. Un service d'urbanisme dans une ville comme Saint-Louis ne dispose pas forcément de matériel, de connaissances et d'expertise pour gérer et faire exploiter l'intelligence artificielle. Donc, effectivement, quand l'expertise internationale produit des plans et dispose de cartes satellites et d'interprétations pour pouvoir décrire, caractériser de manière très précise les phénomènes climatiques, mais aussi le phénomène urbain, ça c'est très utile. Mais après, il faut se méfier de ne pas produire des plans, à mon avis, trop sophistiqués ou qui demanderaient trop de compétences pour les mettre en œuvre par rapport à une gestion finalement assez simple, voire parfois pas de gestion justement de l'espace urbain. Donc c'est plutôt c'est un équilibre à avoir entre une technologie poussée de connaissances et puis une gestion concrète, pratique sur le terrain pour comme on l'a vu d'ailleurs dans la première présentation, constater qu'il n'y a pas d'arbres et pas assez d'arbres dans une ville, même si on la décrit parfaitement et qu'on arrive à modéliser tout ça, il faut arriver à trouver des solutions de transformation sur le terrain et de négociation avec les acteurs locaux pour pouvoir trouver des solutions et par exemple replanter comment, avec qui, avec quel, et trouver les financements et les partenaires qui peuvent le faire. Donc je pense que la question de l'intelligence artificielle, elle est importante pour décrire les phénomènes, pour comprendre et les relations qu'il y a entre les thématiques du développement et donc justement l'articulation entre les objectifs du développement durable, mais ensuite, en termes d'instruments de planification, c'est beaucoup plus, je pense, délicat, mais je pense qu'il y a de la recherche encore à avoir sur ces questions-là.
Thank you, Ludovic. Frugina is here with us.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm just trying to connect back. Are you here, Frusina?
I'm
okay.
Here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, very good. Welcome. The floor is yours. I mean, I made the introduction. I think it's now your time to get started. Please.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to both of you, and apologies for coming in a little bit late, but it's been just one of those weeks we're having our executive board meeting here in Nairobi. But first of all, greetings to everyone from a rainy Kenya. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I have come prepared with a presentation, which I will try. I guess I could share my screen directly, I hope. Let's see. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet, but
Not yet. Let me try.
yes, that's it. Okay, great.
Okay, and you see the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
Let me
go.
just put it on. Okay, one moment. Okay, here we go. Okay, so again, I'm very excited to be here with you today to talk about resilient cities and climate challenges in Africa. Perhaps I could, let me see if I could move these slides. Great. I could start by introducing a little bit the organization that I represent for those who might not be familiar, and explain our engagement with this issue. We're talking today about SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities, and we often say that UN Habitat is the guardian organization of SDG 11. UN Habitat, or as the full name is the United Nations Human Settlements Program, has been mandated by the UN's General Assembly to promote socially and environmentally sustainable cities and communities. Our headquarters is here in Nairobi, Kenya, where I'm based, but this is also the location of our Africa Regional Office, which is where I am sitting directly. The regional office is the sort of go-between between the global level, where we take the international frameworks, such as the SDGs, and the local level, where we operationalize and implement these international frameworks and the country offices. So where I sit is sort of an in-between, where we try to facilitate the coordination and the integration and the connection between what is decided at the international levels, and how we actually localize that in countries. To do this, we partner with regional bodies, national and local governments, and of course, very importantly, local communities. Now, of course, SDG 11 is looking more broadly at socially and environmentally sustainable cities and communities. In my role in particular, and this is one of the flagship programs of UN Habitat in general, but also priority in the region, I look at building urban climate resilience, at climate adaptation, and also supporting disaster risk reduction and disaster preparedness efforts. So what's going on in sub-Saharan Africa? I guess I wasn't unfortunately able to join in for all the previous discussions, but I know that luckily I've had some updates coming to me along the way. So I know that already some of this has been discussed. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but of course we know that sub-Saharan Africa is very exposed to natural hazards, and we're really looking at multi-hazard scenarios here, where you have the seasonal hazards that we've been seeing, such as floods and droughts that of course are occurring in cyclical patterns, and these are compounded by the impact of additional hazards such as global health pandemics. But of course, disaster risk we have to look at through a lens of vulnerability, and risk is connected very closely to urban poverty. Climate change, of course, aggravates this linkage and exacerbates urban risk due to increases in the unpredictability and severity of such events. And of course, growing inequalities, socioeconomic tensions also continue to affect these disasters. And in the region, of course, we're seeing a lot of these limitations: lack of access to basic services, income opportunities which are of course creating aggravating vulnerabilities, and that's creating increasing disaster risk. So what I really would like to start off by is talking about the trio, the trio of climate change, which is, of course, as we know, unfortunately, an inevitable situation which is happening right now, and we're seeing its impacts very, very clearly in the region. Disaster risk reduction, because, of course, as I had just said, climate change is aggravating the impact of disasters, and of course, on growing urbanization. In Africa, it is one of the, it is actually the fastest urbanizing region in the world. And this context needs to be really looked at as both a challenge, especially when we're looking at climate and disaster, but it also needs to be looked at as an opportunity, because of course, cities are where people are, and people come with ideas, innovations, which is of course the topic for today, solutions. And so if we are able to better manage, better plan urbanization in the sub-Saharan African context, we could really have more opportunities and unlocking the potential that comes with urbanization itself, and with having a high density of people co-located in cities where they have opportunities to be able to realize these innovations. So just a word on how Africa is urbanizing. It's really quite important to keep this in mind, especially when we're looking at the relationship to climate and disasters. There's a clear dichotomy in city sizes in sub-Saharan Africa. On the one hand, we have the quickly mushrooming mega cities. So these are your sort of Gauteng region in South Africa, your Lagoses. But at the same time, and we all know these mega cities, and of course understand the complex implications on climate and especially their vulnerable areas when it comes to disaster risk. But in fact, 60% of the urban population in sub-Saharan Africa are currently living in cities with less than 1 million inhabitants, meaning that this population is in cities that are small to medium-sized. And these cities are really seen as potential poles of development. And we have an opportunity here as well, because what we know very much from urban development is that it's very, very difficult to retrofit. Once you have a sprawling informal area in a megacity, it is quite difficult to replan and redesign that area to be more green, to be more resilient. Of course, that work still needs to be done, but what we have an opportunity right now to do is to focus on how where we could still capture the opportunity of these growing small to medium-sized cities where this process is just beginning, and to be able to intervene in the beginning of the process, where we could focus on resilient and risk-informed development from an earlier stage of urbanization, rather than when we already have to sort of, fight fires in a way. So also in the region, it's important to discuss that cities are responsible for around 70% of global energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. But in the African context, this is a little bit different. So, I mean, of course, urban centers in developing countries are generating emissions, but they're generating far lower levels of emissions than in developed countries. And at the same time, they are facing the greatest impacts from climate change. And of course, this is also not possible to really generalize across the entire region. I mean, the region that we're talking about here, sub-Saharan Africa, is extremely broad, it's extremely diverse. You have very different levels of vulnerability. And of course, also different development trajectories across the region, which comes with different opportunity costs as well. So just in terms of again, some of the more general observations that can be made, but again, I'm always sort of I always try to caveat by saying that you can't really generalize anything across the entire region. But what we can do is we can zoom in on some commonalities, especially when it comes to informality. Informality is a phenomenon that we're seeing across the entire region. And in informal settlements, more often than not, we have high population densities. These are often high-risk areas. There's often a lack of infrastructure and basic services. These areas are not well equipped to deal with the increasing threats of climate change. We're looking at inadequate housing, inadequate preparation, lack of early warning systems, lack of evacuation areas. And one thing that I always say when we're talking about resilience is that a city or an urban area is only ever as resilient as its weakest part. And so if its weakest part in African cities, more often than not, we're talking about informal settlements. If its weakest part is highly vulnerable due to these, complex interrelated sets of factors, then that makes the entire urban system, that much more vulnerable, or that vulnerable, really. So urban resilience, I think it must have already been discussed, but of course, we have sort of this general definition of urban resilience, which is on this slide, and I won't read that out to you because I think everybody's familiar with it. I think the important thing is to understand that resilience building is really an all-encompassing concept, and it looks at so many different factors related to reducing both the environmental and the socioeconomic risks, enhancing adaptation, and promoting sustainable development in general. So resilience is actually a pathway towards development that we need to address. So innovation. Innovation, I think, is also just as complex of a concept as resilience in and of itself. And this is something that we've been really trying to tackle here at UN Habitat, is to figure out how we can help magnify innovations from the local level, how we could support innovation at the national level, how we could bring global innovations through channels of South-South, North-South cooperation, knowledge transfer, how we can really leverage innovation to unlock resilience. And what are we talking about here? I mean, this slide, we're looking at, for example, of course, technologies. And technologies is something that I think is the most straightforward. Usually when people think about innovation, they think about digital, about how we can use technology to achieve a more effective end towards a more effective means. But innovation is actually much more broad than that. It also speaks to business models, to products in many different sectors, to processes, to policies. We need to innovate in governance. We need to do governance really differently. Innovation in our thinking, innovation in the lens we look at challenges from, in our approaches. Innovative leadership, of course, and this comes also at many levels, both in the public and private sector, and then of course also innovation in the way that we do things, in the way that we live our daily lives, the behaviors that we pursue. So this is just a sort of a breakdown of, okay, what does that actually mean then more in practice? And I will come to just a few very concrete examples towards the end of my presentation shortly on what we mean by innovation when it comes to resilience building in Africa. But of course, one aspect of, or one source of innovation is participation and co-creation. And this is something that is a major focus of the work that we're doing at the regional office. And this is really looking at how can we increase the number and diversify the voices at the decision table to allow the sharing of knowledge, information, and ideas to jointly find innovative solutions. And here's something that's very critical, is how could we really leverage indigenous knowledge, indigenous solutions, and learn from them and apply them at a broader scale to learn from the local communities who are really at the center of resilience building. And so how could we, for example, implement participatory planning? How could we bring together national governments, municipalities, local communities to be able to jointly come up with solutions in this very, very complex context of resilience building? Of course, we also need to look at partnerships, and these are partnerships across and within different sectors. Urban resilience is everybody's business. It cannot be tackled just by a single institution or the UN or a community or an organization. It is something that requires collaboration between different actors, which can open up space to then also bring in innovative ideas, local entrepreneurs, social enterprises that bring with them innovations from all of those different components that the previous slide looked at. And so how can we better use partnerships? How could we better bring together decision-making, policy-making, and the entrepreneurial and private sector ideas and resources? Then, of course, there's the capacity building element, which is looking at when partnering urban actors, we need to make sure that there's a level of understanding on key gaps, and we need to identify these key gaps to understand also in which sectors innovation is needed, where to tap into this innovation, and how to actually use innovative approaches. You can't just put forth a tool or an idea or some sort of an enterprise without actually all of the stakeholders that are involved or can benefit from that understanding its utility. And then, of course, research. I mean, we need to have an evidence-based base for all of this, and that requires quite careful knowledge management and filling, especially in the region, data gaps. Research gaps. We need to look at trends and impacts and forecasts related to climate change challenges that are facing cities, evaluate existing solutions in light of or vis-a-vis future scenarios, and develop new ideas and innovations that are also based on evidence and data. So I know that in this session we were meant to really focus on digital innovation in African cities, and I think this is a very important topic. But I wanted to cheat a little bit and focus not only on digital, but let's touch on that here for a few minutes, and then I also wanted to just quickly, before wrapping up, touch on non-digital innovations, because I think that's equally important. So I just wanted to highlight sort of three areas where we're really sort of seeing a lot of progress, but still also a lot of challenges in the region. One is digital finance solutions. Despite the fact that there's still persistent imbalance in access in the region, and that has to be accepted and addressed. Technological advances in terms of an increased reach of digital services have clearly offered opportunities in the region for climate resilience solutions that help vulnerable people to anticipate, to adapt to, and to build resilience. There are many different digital financial solutions that are available in different African countries and cities, and the sort of portfolio of financial solutions is increasing. And the important point is that when it comes to vulnerability, they are able to address the challenges, or able to help vulnerable communities address the challenges at all three stages of preparedness or anticipation, adaptation, and of course the longer term resilience building. One area that, especially since COVID, we've seen a lot of investment in is digital solutions for urban food supply chains. So this here I'm talking about things like online solutions for market aggregation to mitigate food supply chain disruptions, things like e-commerce and market reorganization, which of course there's still a lot of room to better integrate poor households, SMEs, and the informal sector, and especially the informal sector. I mean, we know that the informal sector is critical in African cities, and it's a sector that needs to be brought into the better into it's already there, but it needs to be better integrated into the digital universe, and suffered quite a lot in the beginning of COVID, but then we saw a lot of innovations coming where informal sector could be better integrated into the digital marketplace, especially when it comes to food supplies. And then, of course, also, I mean, I'm sitting here in Kenya, where this is very, very evident, but there's a growing climate tech industry that is becoming significantly more and more influential in the region. For example, in Africa, we have an abundance of solar energy, which can be harnessed towards more green growth, and so there is an increasingly enabling or positive enabling environment for startups in the region in this sector. Of course, we're still dealing with a lot of barriers, especially when it comes to inclusion. The digital divide is still very much real. There are persistent barriers to inclusion, like the cost of internet, availability of mobile data, infrastructure gaps, and lack of financing. But before wrapping up, sorry, I just wanted to also touch upon the fact that while the digital sphere is very, very important, and innovation and tech is I think an area where we are already seeing tremendous growth in Africa and tremendous potential, but where there's about to be an even more impressive boom in the region. I think Africa is also really has the potential to be a global champion for a different kind of innovation, which is based in nature and in nature-based solutions, in working with nature in the face of climate change and disaster risk, instead of working against it, which is, of course, what unfortunately we've been seeing more and more of. And especially in the post-COVID-19 context, we've seen a growing interest in ecosystems-based adaptation, nature-based solutions. And in the region, most of the focus has been on alleviating water and food insecurities, enhancing drought and flood risk mitigation, preventing anthropogenic climate change, and improving disaster risk resilience. And this picture that you're seeing here is, for example, one example of flood risk mitigation. This is actually one of the projects that my team is managing in Madagascar, which is a mangrove rehabilitation project in Morondava, which is in a very, very vulnerable coastal area of Madagascar. And of course, through these established ecosystems-based, nature-based approaches and ecosystems services, it's important to really leverage these together with digital solutions to provide systemic solutions to effective and efficient resource use, and to really change the trajectory of the resilience discussion in the region. So I guess my takeaway message here is really that there is already innovation going on in the region, a tremendous amount. There's an enormous potential for unlocking more innovation through those various different channels, and by leveraging the different sources of innovation. And we must also look at innovation holistically, looking both at the digital, the tech side of things, looking also at how we can better work with nature, and of course, looking also at the softer, let's say, more policymaking, governance, capacity components of using smart technologies, using innovation to better unlock resilience building potential in African cities. So with that, I will stop here and ready to receive any questions or comments or thoughts on what I had presented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosina, for this very dense and very exciting presentation. I would have many questions as well for UN Habitat, but I think we have already one or two questions. One is again about the case of Egypt, where you mentioned that it's not easy to work in existing built environment or informal settlements, But in the case of Cairo, for example, where informal settlements are everywhere, I mean, you have to find solutions for improving the conditions of living of these people. But do you think what would be the strategy, or is it to destroy and rebuild as the government wished to do, or is it more with retrofitting, as you said, even though it seems very difficult? What's your take on this?
Wow, we're launching right into the most the most sensitive question. I know. I mean, just as a bit of an institutional background, and from the Regional Office for Africa, we cover only Sub-Saharan Africa, and our Regional Office for Arab States covers North Africa. That said, actually, I come from a background where I was based in the Middle East for 5 years before coming to Kenya, and I know Cairo and I know Egypt very well, and I have seen firsthand those informal settlements, which are just, I mean, unbelievable, really, in Cairo. And of course, you know, what the government wants to do versus what is best for the people. How do I approach this the most diplomatically? I think relocation and rehousing is always, to us, the last option. It is the least desirable option, because it's not just about homes, right? You can't just take an individual and put them from one place to another place and expect that they're able to continue to live their lives as they had before. It's an entire system. We're talking about jobs. We're talking about social circles, about families, about networks, about systems, about schools, childcare. It's all very, very, very closely connected, and relocating people means that you're completely disbanding this entire social system that is in place. So of course, although retrofitting is very difficult, but when it comes to, you know, our approach at UN Habitat, for us, that is the best option in terms of trying to figure out, you know, how we can use exactly innovations and technologies to try to improve the existing settlements that are already in place. And this is really not easy. I'll give another example, because I think Cairo is a really great example on a very large scale, but I'll tell you just a small story of another opposite example. I am responsible for the small island developing states in Africa, and on a recent mission to one of these islands, we visited a settlement that was a small informal settlement on a very beautiful stretch of coast that is highly vulnerable. Well, where essentially a number of experts have said, look, you know, this settlement is going to be washed away by a tsunami within we don't know if it's next year or in 5 years, but it's essentially guaranteed that this settlement will not be here. It will take one event, and it will be destroyed, and lives will be lost, and everything will be lost. So of course the government said, you know, we need to relocate these people because they're living in a zone that is in dire danger. And so they found an alternative area and proposed to the community that they would relocate them to this alternate area, which would of course be slightly more inland, given that the coastal areas are the most valuable for many reasons. And the community flat out absolutely refused. In the face of the information that they knew that it might be any day now, they said that they would rather take the risk. But most of them were a fishing community. So they said, look, you know, you relocate us inland to this fine housing establishment, but we cannot work, we cannot live. We are people of the sea. We get our livelihoods from the sea. We take it to the market. We have that is our only way to survive. And so if you take that away from us today, we would rather not let that happen and face the risk of this tsunami coming, you know, maybe next year, maybe in 5 years, than to know that our livelihoods would be cut off the moment that we're relocated. So anyway, that's just to say that these are extremely difficult. So when you're talking even of a community of 1,000 people, when you're talking about something at the scale of Cairo, I mean, it's a giant problem to tackle, and something that really needs to be looked at, you know, in an integrated way by many different partners at the same time, because there's no single solution to that.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question which deals with what kind of technologies or innovative digital tools can be used to create resilient and inclusive cities. I mean, do you have experience in that? Some case studies already to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think here maybe it would be great if I could have tag team with one of my colleagues. We do have an innovation solutions, and this is solutions team, and this is exactly what we're trying to look at. I mean, as I mentioned in one of those slides, for example, when it comes to digital finance, I think that that's definitely one area where there's a lot of promise, and that could be really geared towards and channeled towards climate adaptation. And digital transformation. Also and here again, it's really important for us to talk about people-centered digital transformation, and that's something that we're always trying to emphasize, is that we're not just talking about smart cities and smart cities that serve certain interests or certain populations. What we're talking about is people-centered digital transformation, is how do we unlock the benefits of digital tools and technologies for everyone, especially the most vulnerable, and in that way contribute to building resilience, especially when it comes to the social and economic aspects of vulnerability. What we're trying to do now, which I think is interesting, I mean, this is not really a case study yet, but hopefully it will breed some more case studies, is we are developing actually a regional program with UNDP on smart urban resilience. So trying to look at we're not sort of sticking those two concepts together, but what we're trying to look at is how do we use smart tools, processes, approaches to unlock resilience building needs in the region. But what I would really like is to actually have a compendium, sort of a global or a regional collection of, what are those existing innovations and tools that are out there that are working. I'm sure that there are already a lot of studies on this. I've seen some, but I haven't really seen kind of a compendium which would be ongoing. But I think something like that would be very useful to have. Okay,
and now be ready for a tricky question. Very tough. Again, we have several questions related to corruption. I mean, how do you how do you deal with this question of corruption? And especially many participants share the idea that urban development has a lot of corruption at stake. I mean, how can we do that? I mean, how can we cope with that? And how much do we depend on the law and the capacity of the weakness of the law, or the law enforcement? I mean, what is your view on this?
Well, yes, you weren't kidding. Of course, that's a very tough question.
No, it's tricky. It's tricky. I told you.
Yeah, and it's not one that I will be able to answer just based on my experience. I mean, corruption is an issue that is being tackled, even just from the perspective of the UN system. It's the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, UNODC, that is the entity that deals primarily with corruption. Though at the level of UN Habitat, we also look at this issue when it comes to governance at the local level. I just, the question reminds me of this video that I watched just 2 days ago that was about it was the guide to dining out in Kenya. I recommend you Google it. It's a very good video. It's a film. It's actually a short film that is very well done and sort of shows exactly how deep-rooted corruption is at every level in our cities, in the region and beyond as well. I mean, this was one example from Kenya. I think if you Google "man given $10 tip guide to dining out in Kenya," you will find it. And the problem is that, as this video shows, the issue is absolutely prevalent at every level. And I mean, that's the problem with corruption, isn't it? Is that, it starts at the individual level and goes all the way up. And so, how do you tackle it when, especially, it's become, in some cases, a way of life. And in fact, it's become, in some cases, an efficient way of life because it allows people to get things done. So how do you reverse those practices? How do you change those behaviors? How do you ingrain a mentality of anti-corruption? And you will see, for example, in Kenya, all over signs, don't bribe here, don't bribe there, because, and this is where I guess I'm trying to go with my message, which is that we need to use things like e-governance, and we need to use technology for awareness raising, because it is not enough to put a sign somewhere saying, this is an area where oftentimes there might be some corruption happening, but rather to be able to reach much more broad audiences, including down to the individual, the household level, through telephones, through television, through the internet, through the kinds of media that people are responding to and consuming, and to be more savvy at sending anti-corruption messages, and calling out corruption, and making possible opportunities for individual citizens to be able to report instances of corruption through more effective digital ways. I've seen boxes in Kenya that's literally a box where you're meant to put a note if you have observed corruption. How much more efficient is it, of course, if you're able to have digital platforms where citizens could take action? So again, I think this is an issue to have an entire and that we are having entire workshops and conversations and exchanges about. But again, I think there's tremendous room for, and there are already definitely solutions in place, but for expanding on solutions and making this kind of citizen-led action on corruption more more possible and more easy for individuals.
Yes, I mean, following this, discussion, there is also another contribution of one of our participants about the institutional void. The problem is the weaknesses of the institution. And what would be the idea of a balance between getting smart solutions for getting the population at the very grassroots level to get enforced, to get more empowerment in terms of capacity of dealing directly with those issues, but we still need strong institutions to work with. So whenever you put in place some smart solutions, as you said, you still need strong institutions. So how do you deal with that? And mostly when you deal with participatory planning, or when you deal, how you build resilience in that kind of context where you face this kind of corruption, hidden corruption or not, and the need for a stronger institution cannot be only the local dwellers at the grassroots level. It has also to be endorsed by the main institution or local governments, for instance. How do you see that in your practice?
Absolutely. No, the responsibility certainly does not solely rest on the individual level. It is or the community level. The responsibility, and there are different sets of responsibilities at each level. We work directly with municipalities, and of course, as I mentioned in my presentation, a big focus for us at UN Habitat at the regional office are small to medium-sized cities. So I work a lot in intermediary cities in Africa, and when it comes to institutional capacities, what we're seeing is that there are a lot of gaps and a lot of weaknesses. And this is not due to a lack of political will, so to say. It's due to a lack of resources. It's due to a lack of personnel. Oftentimes, municipalities are very under-resourced, very, very understaffed, and overextended. And so here there's an opportunity really for digital technologies, e-governance tools, capacity building, training to come in and to be able to fill these capacity gaps that municipalities are suffering from. And municipalities want to use technology to be able to extend their reach despite possible personnel shortages, possible capacity gaps at different levels. So for us, we use very, very low tech tools in a way, for example, to help municipalities do that, and participation, for example, and and participatory planning together with communities is one way to also address the corruption issue, because the closer you bring the communities to the decision makers and to the municipal administrations, the more oversight you have, the more transparency you have, the more the fewer openings you have for possible misuse or abuse of power or the system. And for us, it's about, for example, we have a tool called CityRap, which is simply a methodology that municipalities can use to help them in a systematic way be able to talk to communities about prioritizing resilience building and coming to a joint understanding about climate impacts, what that means for the community on a daily basis, what solutions are possible, what solutions would not work. And so facilitating this kind of dialogue and conversation, and this is actually a really low tech way. But again, you have also you have different innovations and potential digital and tech solutions as well at different levels to fill these resource and capacity gaps.
Excellent. I think shows the very broad scope about what can be done even at the macro level as well as the low level. So I think, very interesting. I think that there would be many questions, but we have a chance now. We have our panelists coming back from somewhere. So I will, if Peniga Ndegwa, sorry for pronunciation, is available, I will leave the floor to her, because we are having another topic which is quite interesting, which is walkable and bikeable cities in Africa. I think, I hope it's possible, and I guess you will demonstrate that it's possible. So I leave the floor for you. Welcome, and it's time for you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, it's okay.
All right. So
you want to share you can share your screen.
Sure. Minutes.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, great.
It's coming. Can you just enlarge the screen? Yeah, excellent. Go on. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So my name is Penina Ndegwa. I'm the program coordinator for Share the Road program at UNEP, and I'll be talking to you about realizing walkable and bikeable cities in Africa. So maybe to give a bit of introduction, allow me to just organize my screen properly. All right, thank you very much. So just a brief introduction, maybe for those people who may not be familiar with the Share the Road program of the United Nations Environment. Share the Road program was launched in 2008 by UNEP and FAIR Foundation. And we support governments and other stakeholders in developing countries, especially to ensure that cities invest for the people who the most vulnerable road users, that's pedestrians and cyclists. And we do this through advocacy. We advocate for ensuring that pedestrians and cyclists are provided for in terms of infrastructure, in terms of policy. We influence government on policies and make sure that they actually invest in projects related to walking and cycling. And we also empower civil societies and citizens to be engaged in the planning processes for walking and cycling. And finally, we also support network through collaborations of civil societies, working groups, and all that. Just make sure that we have a network of experts or champions who can continue advocating for walking and cycling in cities. Just maybe to give you a bit of background where we are in Africa at the moment. So 78% of people in Africa walk for an average of 56 minutes daily. And this is to access jobs, schools, and other basic services. And if you compare this number to the global statistics, for the global level, it's up to 43 minutes. That means in Africa, we have people walking longer and more people walking on the road. But have we actually thought about how we provide for them in terms of the facilities that they require to walk? But actually, we have not, because Africa is the least safe place to walk. Because every day, 261 pedestrians are killed on our roads and 18 cyclists are killed. And actually, majority are actually school-going children. So, but why do we even have this? If you can see, this is a photo from Dakar, and you can see everything is on the same space. There's no organization. We have cyclists, we have pedestrians, we have cars, we have public transport, we have vendors, and everybody is on the street space. And so we need to make sure that we organize our streets to make sure that they are safe and comfortable for the pedestrians to use. Going further, in terms of air pollution, in Africa, again, it's now the second largest, air pollution is now the second largest cause of deaths in Africa. This was not the case. And you know, in terms of motorization, Africa also has the least number of vehicle ownership. But you can see that even as we continue growing, as we continue urbanizing, we are more likely, if we don't change the status quo, we are more likely to have more vehicles on our roads, contributing to a lot of traffic congestion. This is a photo of Nairobi, Thika Road in Kenya. And what happened is that, you know, government always work towards expanding the roads just to cater for the growing demands of the vehicles. But we all know about the principles of induced demand, whereby the more you expand the roads, the more vehicles that you attract on the road. As a result, you have a lot of traffic congestion, resulting to traffic emissions. That again is contributing greatly to climate change that you're trying to combat in our cities. So for this reason, we have to think about how transport is contributing negatively to our deaths, especially on attributed not only about the accidents, but also by the air pollution. And actually, another thing that is actually more depressing for me is obesity, something that was not there before. Because again, obesity is on the rise in Africa, and it's the World Health Organization estimates that by 2023, which is not verified next year, that we will be having 1 in every 5 adults and 1 in every 10 children being obese, you know. And we know that we can reduce this by ensuring that people can actually continue walking, maybe to access services. Of course, they're already walking, but they're not safe. And that already limits the number of people who actually walk. So by maybe ensuring that school-going children are not stuffed in a school bus, they can actually walk to school. Those trips ensure that they are more active and they're able to exercise, and we have a healthy nation. So, but then why is it so difficult with all those statistics? We all now we've seen that a lot of people walk, at least 78% in Africa for 56 minutes. We have more pedestrian and cyclists being killed on our roads. We have now air pollution being on the rise and obesity on the rise. But then why is it that we still find it slow for the government to invest in active mobility, that is walking and cycling? First is because there is the lack of budgetary allocation for walking and cycling. Most of the budgets for the infrastructure projects across Africa will just focus on the big infrastructure project. We have expressways, we have highways, but for walking and cycling facilities, they are lumped into those projects. And there's no delineation on how much is allocated specifically for walking and cycling. For that reason, you will see that the government or the contractor will leave the project without necessarily providing for the pedestrian and cyclists. Then we also have inadequate policies for walking and cycling. And by that, I mean that if the government lacks standards, if they lack a policy that really enforces them to actually invest in walking and cycling, then we are going to see low adoption of or rather low development or investment in walking and cycling. And again, when it comes to standards, if we do not have proper standards that can guide governments on how to design a street to make sure that everybody is provided for, then we continue the status quo where we prioritize the minority who use the car. And finally, cycling and walking is seen, there's a perception that it's actually a mode for the poor. And this is something that we've, you know, as soon as you get your money, then you want to buy a car, you buy yourself out of walking and cycling. And this is a culture that needs to be changed, because walking and cycling is not necessarily for the poor. And so thinking about all those aspects, how then can we change that? But if you think critically, is it really a money issue? Yeah, depending on how, you know, across different countries across Africa are investing. In Nairobi, again, we've just recently launched the most expensive highway, the Nairobi Expressway. And this, I actually happened to use it for the first time last week, and I felt so guilty about it. And I have always avoided using it at a personal level because they did all this road. Initially, some of those corridors, we used to have some good walking and cycling infrastructure, but then when they were developing it, they demolished, they cut down the trees, and then there was no space left for pedestrians. Up to now, it's very good, it's very comfortable as a motorist if you're a driver, but very bad for anybody walking and cycling. There was no consideration on where the pedestrian and the cyclist will actually walk. And considering the cost of that highway, does that, if they were able to afford that, how comes they were not able to just ensure that there's provision for pedestrian and cyclists in the highway? Again, thinking about some of the interventions that are made, we have some of the most expensive footbridges in the world again. Why? Because we focus a lot on the speed. And one thing that we've realized is that most accidents actually happen a few meters away from the footbridges. Because, you can imagine being a person with a disability, being a pregnant woman, or how African women are. They always, especially if they are vendors, they are carrying loads and goods and services across the other sides of the street. So logically, it would make more sense for them to just, jump over or like estimate the distance, run across the road, and risk their lives to be hit by a car. But then we realize that these footbridges, despite being so expensive, they're actually not functional. And so we need to just think of a different strategy on how we actually invest in pedestrian and cyclist infrastructure. Sorry, that's why it's not moving. So we cannot continue like this, because if you continue the status quo, then you're going to lose more lives. We'll continue having more traffic congestions. We are going to continue having more air pollution, and we don't want to continue like this. And for us, I think the strategy that we intend to use is to ARC. And by this, we have the concept. I know majority of us maybe have heard about avoid, shift, and improve, but then we decided to add something else, which is enable. For enabling means that you have to ensure that you create a favorable environment that would increase investment in walking and cycling facilities. That is mostly through policies and building capacity for the institutions that the government and the people responsible for designing our cities, they have the capacity to know that this is how you design your streets, and this is how you organize or realize walkable cities and safe cities for the cyclists and the most vulnerable users. Then avoid means that you ensure that there is compact, we develop, we don't design cities or transport system in silo. We have to do integration with the land use planning. So by this, we have to ensure that our cities are compact, that it's easy for you to access goods and services easily by walking or cycling, that you don't necessarily have to use a car to go to, access a service, to go to school or to go to the shopping malls, that everything is through that. And I know there's a concept known as TOD, which you can talk about in another platform. But for today, just thinking about how you make sure that land use planning and transport planning are integrated, ensuring that the land uses are mixed, there's compact development, there's dense development, that more people are living near where they work and access services, that now it is easier for you to walk than avoid any or take any other mode of transport. And again, we have the concept of shift. And this is now whereby we all know that, of course, everybody's a pedestrian. Actually, I know I talked about the 70%, but at the beginning or at the end of your journey, somehow you have to walk to your door, to your house, to your office. But at the same time, we cannot escape other modes of transport. But then instead of focusing a lot or giving more priority to the car, then we need to shift that to ensuring that majority of people are actually now shifting to using public transportation. And finally, about improving, it's about improving the efficiency of modes of transport. I know you're thinking how this particularly concept applies to walking and cycling, but we do have cities like, for example, in Kigali that have high terrain, that in as much as there's a bike share in the city, that just electrifying the bike share system would ensure that more people are able to cycle comfortably without necessarily, coming out of the bike when they're climbing up a hill. So those are the 4 concepts, the strategies that can help us achieve walking and cycling in our cities. Enable, avoid, shift, and improve. And I'll just be highlighting a few examples of what we've done as UNEP Share the Road program to make sure that this is done. And the first one is ensuring that we have minimum budget. If you don't allocate it, talked about like this lack of allocation, that fine, there's already, like especially like in development right now across Africa, a lot of cities are investing heavily on infrastructure. So it's just a matter of allocation. And if it's not put on paper on policy that this is the minimum allocation, then there's no development, or there's no provision that will be done for walking and cycling. So we've seen this happening in the last previous regime through the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, where they committed 20% of their transport budget to go to development of walking and cycling facilities. And we've seen this has resulted to expansion within a very short time. Just implementing that policy, it has led to expansion of walking and cycling facilities across the city. This is, for example, there was a street, this is a street in Nairobi CBD, Kenyatta Avenue, that initially did not even have what you can see, but right now they have actually developed it and it's comfortable for the pedestrians and the cyclists to use the space. So anchoring the budget is critical, and we have to make sure that a city has a minimum budget for that. And then you have to develop policies, because some of the money that is allocated to walking and cycling, some can go to policy, some can go to standard development, some can go to capacity building for the government officials. There's so much that can go, but first, we have to start with the budget allocation. Then now we have to develop and adopt policies for walking and cycling. From our research, we found out that only 35% of countries in Africa have walking and cycling policies. So if they don't have policies, there's nothing really legally pushing them or prompting them to actually provide for walking and cycling in their cities. But we've seen an example of Rwanda, where in 2021, they adopted the National Transport Policy, a project again that UNEP supported. And within a very short time from its inception, of course, policy takes time to be adopted, but from its inception, we've seen expansion of pedestrian and cycling infrastructure, and we've seen dedication of a pure car-free zone in the Imbuga Walk, which is very comfortable and friendly for the pedestrians and anybody who just want to hang out in the city. And we've actually seen a bi-monthly car-free days where even the president participates in. Through this, then we're able to see that Rwanda is becoming a pace setter in terms of how cities are developed and become more cycling friendly for the cyclists in Kigali. So policies are very important, and we need to make sure that in the near future we go at least up to 75% of countries having walking and cycling policies. And something else that you're trying to work on as UNEP is what you're calling Pan-African Action Plan for Active Mobility, which is dubbed PAPAM. And so this project, it's a Pan-African policy, which we are aiming to target government, or rather all stakeholders from across government to champions to thematic groups. And what you're trying to do through this project, you're trying to raise the profile of active mobility. It's been neglected for a while. It's not been seen as a priority by governments. But now what you're trying to do by ensuring that we raise the profile by highlighting the benefits for walking and cycling in our cities, then more people are more likely to, or more government are likely to invest in walking and cycling. Then we're also ensuring that they can commit to investing in walking and cycling. And of course, they define common priorities, because the challenges are similar all across Africa, that pedestrians are the highest victim of accidents. There's no provision for cycle network. The persons with disabilities are not able to access. Women, again, being the majority of the users, are not catered for. So we are trying to come up with some commitments that will commit governments across Africa to, it's gonna be like a sort of an African-wide policy that promotes walking and cycling. And how PAPAM is working, we are working, of course, it's spearheaded by Share the Road program. And what we are working with regional leaders across Africa. So we have Northern Africa led by ITDP Egypt, which is coordinating all organizations and stakeholders from the North African region. Then we have Eastern African, again, we have ITDP together for the Eastern region. Then we have Western and Central Africa led by Ochenil Mobility. And finally, for the Southern Africa, we have SAD Alliance, who will be coordinating stakeholder engagement and all that. Of course, it is supported by other global organizations such as Walk21, University of Cape Town, Bikes, and UN Habitat. And so how some of the stakeholders will be involved in the PAPAM development process. We have signatories. These are now like the government, who we can now make sure that they sign up to commit to investing in walking and cycling. Again, we have implementers who again are more likely to be government, the ministries of transport, and all that. We have advocacy group, we have champions and advocacy, and all these people are going to be engaged throughout the process of developing PAPAM. And this process is still ongoing. And I'll tell you in a few minutes on how you can participate. Just to highlight a few provisional commitments, some of the key items that are likely to be in the final document, but this is just provisional. We want to ensure that every country has a policy. We've talked about the benefit of having a policy to increasing walking and cycling cities or countries in Africa. So we are pushing for policy development. We are talking about road safety, how we have to reduce the number of victims on road-related crashes. We have to ensure that there's financing and investment, that there's budgetary allocation. We have to promote the cycling culture through car-free days and all that. So these are just provisional commitments. They're not cast on stone. It's still at a very early stage. And this process, this program continues to be developed, and you can be of great support. I'll highlight on how you can join the program, or rather the project, be involved. Then the other aspect, other than policy, we have to think about modal integration. We talked about last and fast mile connectivity being made by walking and cycling. So again, only 32% of population in Africa live within 500-meter walking radius. So if you cannot be able to walk to accessing a public transport, then you're more likely to use like the borders and motorcycles, which again pollute more. They're causing more accidents in our roads. And then again, if people are not connected, then they're high likely to, there's more chances for them buying a car than using public transportation. So you have to think about modal integration to ensure that people, even the public transport, as we invest in it, whether it's a BRT, that they're well connected to with walking and cycling infrastructure. Then you have to leverage on international financing. Of course, we know most of this funding, other than, of course, the local financing that can come from the city, from parking management, for example, we have a lot of international donors who finance infrastructure. Again, it's up to us to make sure that as they invest in our countries for infrastructure, that you're directing that investment to walking and cycling. And for example, we've seen in Mombasa, for example, in Kenya, again, that through that financing, through international financing, we've managed to just do a pedestrian walkway across the ocean, linking the island and the Mombasa. Mombasa is like an island, and through this, it has saved a lot of time, and over 20 people use that bridge every day. So it's really a matter of us showing the government where to put the money. And of course, we have to showcase interventions. We have to showcase, because sometimes it may require us as the experts to showcase what is possible on our cities. And this can be done through civil society. For example, we had Urban October, where we see a lot of organizations doing temporary interventions. These are critical to just showing the government or people who are not fully converted on possibilities of how a street redesign would look like upon implementation. And of course, we have to translate this to permanent. interventions. And finally, we have to build capacity. We just concluded a very big forum in June 2022, and we had convened over 100 government officials from across Africa, and the rest, we just wanted to train them, or rather build capacity to make sure that they understand. Sorry, my daughter is coming. Thank you so much. So yeah, we have capacity building. So just making sure that governments understand, or the people, if the people in charge of developing infrastructure are not conversant with proper street design guidelines or active mobility policies, then there's no way we are going to realize walkable and cycling cities. So what we have to do, we have to build capacity. Of course, another great initiative that you're doing, UNEP has a very good program known as African Network for Walking and Cycling, or ANWAC. And what we do is again convened by what, I'm so sorry guys, my daughters are here playing. I'm so sorry, they have closed school, so they're all over the place playing. So African Network for Walking and Cycling, of course, it is led by UNEP Share the Road program, and it's convened by Walk 21. And we have experts and champions from across Africa. And they are then now convened into different working groups from government, financing and walking, public transportation. In short, there's something for everybody. And this is a free network for you to join. And all you need to do is sign up. And we have members from across Africa. You can see some countries we have high representation than others, but that does not mean that more people cannot join. So just to encourage you to pass an invitation to join a group of like-minded people who can be able to share knowledge, exchange network, to be able to grow. And that's about it. Thank you so much for listening to me. I'm looking forward to hearing if you have any questions. And sorry for the small disruption. Thank you very much. So feel free to, if you want to join ANWAC, feel free to email myself or Juliet Rita from Walk 21. Let's join together. Let's build a great network for walking and cycling. If we have more champions, we can easily be able to convert even the unconverted policymakers. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Penina. Thank you very much. We have a question from our participant. I mean, it's about cultural perception. I mean, as you know, it's a very complex issue, and it depends on the very specific context and geographic spaces. So, as most African cities tend to address this issue of mobility in the short of medium term, what is, I mean, this is a barrier, and how can this barrier can be addressed in the long term in order to encourage more people to engage in sustainable active mobility? I mean, what is the issue with cultural perception and cultural barriers? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Yeah, it's a very tricky question, first of all, because I do not know who said that walking and cycling is for the poor while everybody else walks, you know. But I think the most important thing is for us to be the role models of our children who are growing up. And also, if you're a city leader, we've seen, for example, we have the mayor from Mozambique, the cycling mayor, who has set an example of by cycling to work every day, and he has resulted to ensuring that everybody in the office cycles to work. So we need, if you're a city leader, you need to set the example. You have to set the precedent to be walking and cycling. If you're a government official, please cycle so you don't have to always take your car. That's one thing. And again, providing through like car-free days are very important, because through car-free days, and that's why we have to bring in all stakeholders from private sector, because government just cannot do desensitization by themselves. So through car-free days, it's possible to ensure that more people are sensitized on the benefits for walking and cycling. That is just not about pollution and traffic jams. It's about their health. It's about their children accessing school safely. But most importantly, we have to see government investing in the infrastructure themselves, because when you provide the space, you automatically have the people on the street. So yeah, thanks.
Yes, maybe I will have a question for you as well. I mean, as UNEP, as you're very much focusing on the green gas emissions, for instance, do you have an estimation about what kind of, I mean, how many carbon tons of carbon can be avoided by shifting or improving the active mobility as regard to the motorization, which is growing in Africa cities, for instance? I mean, everybody wants to have a car, and we know that this model is not sustainable. So how can you measure the impact and the need for not going for this model and having a more impact on active and soft mobility, let's say?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So again, we actually still working on that in terms of measuring the exact contribution for walking and cycling or contribution to walking and cycling to reduction of traffic emission. Because, you know, of course, for the vehicles, it's very easy to detect because you know that if you move this number of people from these cars, it's to public transportation, it's very easy to determine. Or if you electrify a bus, a public transportation fleet, it's so easy to identify. But for pedestrians, it's been a bit difficult, but we're actually working on it. And there are some studies that have come out. One just released recently by ITDP Africa. Maybe I can share the link later. So they are still ongoing studies, and I know by next year we should be having some really comprehensive contribution or measurements on how walking and cycling is contributing to climate mitigation. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was asking this because many of the funding agencies are looking at this indicator to fund projects because they want to have a result. The end result is then how many tons of carbon have you avoided by the end of the year. So it's important that we have in mind these figures so that we are able to deal and to negotiate projects with donor agencies or even with municipalities. I mean, this is again not only a cultural barrier but also some kind of individual and collective responsibility towards the climate change. I mean, that's why.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have another question maybe. Yeah, coming up. Yeah, I think it's the same question is coming up as well. I mean, how can active mobility reduce traffic pollution? I mean, I think we have kind of answered, but how do you see this trend in the next few years? If we may put this question to you.
Okay, it's just a matter of bringing more people to walking and cycling, because we have to understand why are people not walking and cycling as they should. Yes, of course, we have the numbers are there because a lot of people are still walking, but we still have the few who are the motorists who contribute significantly to the pollution. So it's a matter of us now making sure that they are shifted from using their private cars to more sustainable modes of transport, that is walking, cycling, or at least using public transportation in the worst case scenario. And by this, we have to invest in the infrastructure. I'll give an example. Personally, I live in Nairobi and I cannot even cycle. Why? Because we do not have safe infrastructure. I do not want to die on the road just because I was advocating for that. But if I knew from my home to my office, there's proper cycle network from my house, there's safe crossings for me to cross, then I would even let my daughter to go to school by herself. But unfortunately, we do not have infrastructure. So the more infrastructure we build, the more we bring more people to walking and cycling. And we have to make sure that it is quality infrastructure in terms of comfort, convenience, safety. They have to be well lit, for example, to make sure that it's comfortable even for people to walk in the late hours or early mornings. So again, crossing is so important because if there are no safe crossings, then we have to, people will just avoid, or we'll turn to a more unsustainable mode. So the secret is just bringing in more people, and we bring more people through infrastructure provision. And how do we build the infrastructure? We have to allocate budget for that. We have to have policies that guide government on how to design cities that support or transport infrastructure that support pedestrian and cyclists. And that's what UNEP is trying to do.
Yes, thank you. I'm just reading another couple of questions, and I think we will be ending this program this morning. I have a kind of comment about one colleague who is an urban planner from Tunisia, and he says that, of course, everybody's looking at, the object SDG number 11, but there's a need for recognizing the urban planner as a full expert. So because otherwise they will not be able to implement this agenda, because they are only experts to the local governments. So maybe I can complement this question by this comment and question by the idea of how do we plan, because you're talking about policies, okay? But when it comes to physical planning, how do you make this step forward to kind of have this implementation at the physical level? Because you mentioned this case study in central Nairobi, but I guess this is one of a privileged district, if I may say. How do we deal to expand this kind of measure and solution to all the city to be inclusive and to be targeting the people who are a little out in the outskirts, for instance?
Oh, thank you so much. First, in terms of, I'm an urban planner myself. So and one thing I know for sure is that I cannot work alone. I cannot work in silo. I have to work with engineers. I have to work with environmentalists. I have to work with architects. So we have to work together as all professionals to realize sustainable cities. It's not a one-man show thing. It's not, urban planners do not have all the solutions. And then I also talked about integration of land use and transport planning. So what we've seen before and what causes all the mess is because transport planning has been isolated. Land use planning is, they are not talking to each other. They're not, there's no integration, there's no relationship. So when that does not happen, then we will end up having, urban sprawl, cities that are not sustainable, cities that are car-centric. But then if now we integrate land use and transport planning, and that's why I talked about bringing all the professionals under one roof in designing a project, then that way you're able to ensure that we realize compact cities, we realize mixed-use development. We make sure that a school is near the residential neighborhoods, that I can access work opportunities within my neighborhood. And in the worst case scenario, I am able to build a public transportation in accessing services. So all those aspects means you cannot work alone. And all realizing again, even if you develop a very good plan without adopting it into a policy, then there's no way it's going to be implemented. And you talked about now scaling it down from now, like for example, the Nairobi CBD to other districts. If we do one call at the core, right, then we should be able to replicate into other neighborhoods. So it's just a matter of doing one thing right, and then it's going to set precedent for the other neighborhoods. So I would encourage that we don't work in silo, and that's why in UNEP we work a lot on building capacity. We understand people are from different backgrounds. We have engineers. I have actually had a struggle with engineers who are very rigid. They just focus on the highways and the speed and geometry of the road. They're not thinking about how the two things relate to the public spaces, the schools that are there. But if you bring our minds together with time and more capacity building, they're able to be converted. And we've seen actually some of the most rigid engineers now become the greatest champions for active mobility. So it's a matter of consistency, it's a matter of building capacity, and even joining the networks like ANWAC, like I talked about, African Network for Walking and Cycling. Join a group of champions. It's free knowledge. You have like free conferences, free webinars, free trainings that you get to learn what other cities are doing. We do have, we take people, for example, for study tours like in Kigali that has done things very well. Just taking them there and they realize Rwanda is a small country, for example, but it's able to do great streets compared to Nairobi, a bigger economy, then they're challenged and they're able to bring home some of the lessons that they have learned and they're able to implement. So it's really a matter of sharing knowledge, being in a hub of like-minded people, and not just assuming that you know everything. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we have to close, but I think maybe one last question that is just coming up in the on the internet. I mean, there is this issue about the space, the availability of space to provide this pedestrian and walk and cycling infrastructure. So how can we manage? I mean, you mentioned that, but it's coming again as a question, so I put it back to you. And a subsidiary question comes with the problem of safety and the problem of encroachments on those places that might be encroached by other people, so that then after some time the cycling lane is not available anymore. So how do you deal? I mean, it's very pragmatic, but how do you deal with this kind of situation?
So two things. First, there's space. It's a matter of prioritization. It's always a matter of prioritization. Who do we actually focus on? If our numbers can tell that majority of the people are actually walking and cycling than using the private car, then why is it that we're designing the street, giving more priority to the minority who are using the car? So it's just a matter of redesigning the street to make sure that it actually accommodates the pedestrian. You start with let's use statistics. Let's prioritize the pedestrian. In the worst case scenario, why don't you have seen, for example, I'll give you an example, like the street that I showcased for Nairobi, that whole part used to be parking spaces. But what did they do? They did away with parking, and they provided for the walking and cycling. Initially would have said there's no space for providing a bike lane, but actually we have proved that it is actually possible. It's just a matter of redesigning and reorganizing the space to make sure that we provide for the pedestrian and the cyclist. The other question is about safety. You have to make sure that safety, of course, is paramount. You have to make sure that there's safe crossings. There has to be, you know, for example, I've seen in Kenya, for example, where a street or a highway was done were meant to be a bypass, but now there's urban neighborhoods all over, and it's no longer like a bypass. It's now an urban street, and there are many schools, there are many businesses across the road, and people have to keep crossing. And if you don't provide that crossing, if you do not adjust to the changes of the urbanization, then we will continue having accidents. So we have to think about traffic calming, reducing the speeds even around the school zones to make sure that safety is enhanced. The other question somebody asked about encroachment. This is a very catch-22 situation. You will see a lot of vendors on the street space, and I would not say that they are entirely bad, because they make the street very vibrant. I have seen, that's how people make, I don't know, I've actually been in some cities, and even Kigali, where you see there are no vendors, some streets don't have vendors. Honestly, they're very lonely, they're very isolated. There is something that lacks. At the same time, I've also seen some very bad streets in Nairobi where the whole space is now like a market, because the hawkers have put all their wares on the road, and there's no space for people to walk, and they have to mix again with the cars, exposing them to accidents. So it's a matter of enforcement. And that's where the city has to really be strong on. There has to be enforcement to make sure that people or vendors are reorganized. Again, going back to how you design the street such that you can accommodate them in the spaces that is given. You have the ability to cater for them, like in the street design, provide a small space for them to vend, and at the same time, make sure that they do not encroach. Because the street, not in all streets, alternatively, you can come up with mechanisms like maybe hourly, maybe they can be told from, maybe only allowed to sell your wares past 6:30 p.m. and they can use that space, and it's now close to their cars. It's purely vending. So it's just a matter of the city thinking of how to accommodate all those issues. But most importantly, it's about enforcement. It has to be important that I always get upset, for example, in Nairobi, where I'm trying to cross a road, but I don't even have a place to go to because the whole space has been encroached. And I'm always wondering who owns the space anyway. Do I have less rights as a pedestrian than a hawker? You know, so it's a matter of us now as the government has to protect its people, and the vendors are also their people there, and they're also contributing to the economy and of the country. But at the same time, let's accommodate them. Let's redesign our street in a way that we can accommodate them, or come up with a strategy that can ensure that there's less conflict for the pedestrian and the cyclist.
Okay, I think the message is very clear, and I think we have to thank you very much for this presentation. I think there are many people who are asking for your contact. I think you gave it to us. Obviously, I think all the details and the contact will be available on the platform or through the program. Thank you again. I think we need now to close the session. Before that, I would like to thank all the panelists for their contribution and also the questions from the participants, what I tried to convey to the panelists. And I will give back the screen to Rida for the next information. Thank you again for attention, and see you next time. Rida, this is for you.
Okay, thank you. So I thank all the speakers for their interesting topics, and I remind you that this is the third edition of the webinar in a series of 4 in order to prepare the international conference on African cities that will take place next year between 21 and 23 March. So this first edition focuses on African digital cities as a potential solution to address urban challenges in Africa. So we will close this first session now, and we will start again around 3 p.m. GMT +1 for the second session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, thanks.